What if the biggest power move in hip-hop right now isn't a hit song, a chart-topping album, or even a billion-dollar deal, but a lawsuit that nobody saw coming? Because according to whispers spreading across the internet, Jay-Z has allegedly taken legal action against 50 Cent after a series of explosive claims. And the real question everyone is asking is this: what exactly did 50 Cent say that pushed one of the most calculated men in the industry to respond like this? And wait, it gets even more unsettling. Because while all of this is unfolding, another name keeps echoing in the background: Sean Combs, but not in the way you'd expect. Because now, people are starting to ask the unthinkable question: is there someone inside this entire situation who knows more than they're letting on? Someone who might be talking quietly, strategically, behind the scenes? Think about it. 50 Cent doesn't move randomly. He builds pressure. He drops hints. He watches the reaction. And then, when the timing is just right, he turns speculation into something much bigger. So if he's really been sitting on information this entire time, why speak now? Why push this narrative so hard? And why does it feel like every new statement is adding fuel to a fire that was already burning out of control? And then there's Jay-Z, the man who rarely reacts, the man who stays silent while the world talks, the man who has built an empire on control, precision, and silence. So what does it mean when even he is being pulled into the noise? Is this about damage control? Or something far more serious that's just beginning to surface? Because right now, nothing feels normal anymore. Allegations, accusations, hidden connections, old rumors resurfacing, and a growing feeling that something deeper is being uncovered piece by piece. So, the question isn't just what's being said. The real question is, what is about to come next? The situation didn't start as a lawsuit. It didn't even start as a headline. It started as whispers, small, calculated comments that quickly turned into something much louder once people began connecting the dots. And once names like Jay-Z, 50 Cent, and Sean Combs entered the same conversation, the internet did what it always does. It didn't wait for confirmation. It escalated the story. Let's start with what's actually known. 50 Cent has been publicly vocal in a way that feels intentional. He doesn't just make random statements. His style is layered. He throws out comments, observes reactions, and then builds on them. Recently, his focus has been heavily tied to the ongoing scrutiny surrounding Sean Combs, especially following multiple allegations and investigations that have already shaken the entertainment industry. But what's interesting is how quickly the conversation expanded beyond Diddy, because 50 Cent didn't stop there. He started questioning silence. He started pointing toward the people who aren't speaking. And that's where things shifted. In this environment, silence isn't just silence anymore, it's interpreted as something meaningful. When a figure like Jay-Z, known for being extremely controlled and private, chooses not to engage publicly, people begin to fill in the gaps themselves. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Now, let's be clear about something. There are claims circulating. There are lawsuits being discussed, but not everything being said is proven fact. Some of it is legal, some of it is speculative, and some of it is purely narrative-driven, amplified by online platforms. However, what makes this situation intense is that all of these layers are happening at the same time. A civil lawsuit has brought Jay-Z's name into the conversation, alleging involvement in a past incident. Jay-Z has denied these claims strongly. His response wasn't soft or neutral. He pushed back hard, calling the allegations baseless and accusing the opposing side of attempting to pressure him through legal and public channels. That alone tells you something about the level of seriousness involved. When someone with that level of influence responds this directly, it means the stakes are high. But here's where the narrative becomes more complex. Because this isn't just about one lawsuit. It's about perception. In the court of public opinion, the internet doesn't operate on evidence the way a courtroom does. It operates on timing, emotion, and connection. So when multiple narratives start overlapping Diddy's legal situation, 50 Cent's commentary, Jay-Z's silence, and now Jay-Z's legal response, it creates a layered story that feels bigger than any single piece of it. And that's exactly what's fueling the conversation. People are asking questions like, why now? Why is this surfacing at this moment? And why do certain voices seem more active while others remain completely silent? This is where 50 Cent becomes central again. Because he's not just reacting, he's positioning himself within the narrative. Whether intentional or not, his commentary has added pressure to the situation. And in doing so, he's transformed what could have been a contained legal discussion into a full-blown media spectacle. But what makes this even more controversial is the suggestion that someone might be holding information. Now, let's be very careful here. There is no verified evidence proving any kind of insider snitching in the way the internet is framing it. However, in the world of speculation, especially in entertainment media, narratives like this gain traction quickly. People start to assume that if one person is speaking loudly, another must be speaking quietly behind the scenes. And that's where Diddy's name continues to come up. Not because of new confirmed actions in this specific context, but because of the existing legal and public scrutiny he is already under. Once someone is in that position, every connection around them gets re-examined. Every past relationship, every collaboration, every interaction suddenly becomes relevant again, even if it had nothing to do with the current situation. That's how narratives expand. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Meanwhile, Jay-Z's response continues to be one of firm denial. His legal stance is clear. He's not settling quietly, and he's not accepting the narrative being pushed against him. Instead, he's choosing to confront it directly through legal channels. That alone suggests that whatever is happening behind the scenes, it's being taken seriously on both sides. But again, the public isn't operating inside the legal system. The public is watching from the outside. And from that perspective, every statement, every silence, every reaction or lack of reaction becomes part of the story. And that's where the tension builds. Because now people aren't just asking what happened. They're asking who knows what. And more importantly, who might say something next. At this point, the narrative has already expanded beyond its original scope. What began as allegations and legal filings has now evolved into a much broader discussion about power, influence, and control within the industry. People are revisiting old moments, questioning past decisions, and analyzing relationships that, until recently, were considered stable or untouchable. And in doing so, they're creating a version of events that may or may not align with reality, but is powerful enough to shape public perception. And this is where things get even more intense. Because once a story reaches this level, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads, it evolves, and it starts to attract more voices, some credible, some speculative, and some purely opportunistic, which brings us back to the core question at the center of all this. Is this simply a case of legal allegations and media amplification? Or are we watching something much bigger begin to unfold in real time? And if so, who is really in control of the narrative? The moment a story reaches this level of visibility, it stops being just about what is true and starts becoming about what is believed. And that's exactly where this situation now stands. Because as more voices enter the conversation, the lines between fact, speculation, and pure narrative begin to blur even further. Following the legal denial from Jay-Z, the discussion didn't slow down, it intensified. His statement didn't silence the conversation. Instead, it amplified it. Why? Because in high-profile cases like this, strong denial often has the opposite effect in the court of public attention. People begin to ask, if the claims are so serious, why is this being handled through statements and legal filings rather than open dialogue? But that question doesn't have a simple answer, because at the same time, 50 Cent continues to operate in a very different lane. His approach isn't about direct confrontation, it's about suggestion, about tone, about timing, and most importantly, about control over how the story unfolds in the public eye. He doesn't need to confirm anything outright. He just needs to raise enough questions, and that's exactly what he's been doing. By tying his commentary to the ongoing situation surrounding Sean Combs, 50 Cent has effectively created a narrative bridge between multiple high-profile figures. Whether intentional or not, that bridge has caused audiences to begin associating separate issues together. And once that happens, perception becomes extremely difficult to reverse, because now, every new detail isn't viewed independently, it's viewed as part of a larger pattern. And that pattern, according to online discourse, suggests that something deeper might be unfolding behind closed doors. But here's where things need to be grounded. There is no confirmed evidence that supports many of the more extreme claims circulating online. No verified proof has been publicly presented linking Jay-Z to any wrongdoing in the context of the broader speculation being discussed. However, the existence of legal filings and public statements has created enough material for interpretation, and interpretation is where narratives are born. This is also where figures like Jaguar Wright enter the conversation, adding fuel to the fire. Her statements are direct, bold, and highly controversial. She frames her claims in a way that leaves little room for ambiguity, which naturally draws attention. But attention does not equal verification, and that distinction is critical, because the more extreme the claim, the more carefully it must be examined. Yet in the current digital environment, the opposite often happens. The most shocking statements spread the fastest, regardless of their factual foundation. Meanwhile, the public reaction continues to evolve. Some people are defending Jay-Z, pointing out his long-standing reputation, his business empire, and his history of calculated moves. They argue that these allegations appear to be opportunistic, possibly designed to pressure a settlement or generate attention. Others, however, are taking a more skeptical stance, suggesting that where there is smoke, there may be something worth investigating further. And in between those two extremes lies the majority people who are simply trying to understand what is actually happening. But the challenge is that the story is constantly shifting. As soon as one detail is discussed, another emerges. As soon as one claim is addressed, another narrative takes its place. This constant cycle creates a sense that the situation is always evolving, never settling, never resolving, and that keeps audiences engaged from a media perspective. This is where things become particularly interesting, because this kind of narrative where multiple high-profile figures are connected through legal, historical, and speculative threads naturally lends itself to ongoing coverage. It's the kind of story that invites continuous updates, ongoing debate, and endless interpretation, but it also raises a serious question. At what point does coverage become amplification? And at what point does amplification begin to shape reality itself? Because right now, what we're seeing isn't just reporting. It's a feedback loop. A claim is made. It gets discussed. It gets interpreted. It spreads. Then new reactions are formed based on that spread, and those reactions feed back into the original narrative, giving it even more momentum. And in that cycle, it becomes harder and harder to separate original fact from amplified perception. Meanwhile, the ongoing legal situation involving Jay-Z continues to unfold quietly in the background. Legal teams are preparing, responses are being reviewed, and the structure of the case is being built through formal channels. This is where the real decisions will be made, not in comment sections, not in social media threads, but in courtrooms and legal filings. However, public perception operates on a completely different timeline, and that timeline is much faster, much louder, and far more unpredictable. This is why every new statement, every new rumor, and every new connection becomes significant. Even something as simple as silence is interpreted as a signal, and that brings us back to the central tension, because while Jay-Z is maintaining a controlled legal approach, and while 50 Cent continues to push narrative pressure through commentary, the broader situation surrounding Diddy remains a major anchor point in this entire conversation. The allegations, the investigations, and the ongoing scrutiny have created an environment where every connected name is being reevaluated. Not necessarily because they are involved, but because proximity invites speculation, and in this case, Proximity has become enough to spark a global conversation. Now the question becomes even more layered. Is this simply a case of multiple, high-profile figures being pulled into overlapping but unrelated situations? Or is the public witnessing the early stages of something far more interconnected than it appears on the surface? That question doesn't have a clear answer, not yet. But one thing is certain, this story is not slowing down. If anything, it's gaining momentum, and as more details emerge and as more voices enter the conversation, the narrative will continue to evolve, shift, and expand in ways that may be difficult to predict, and that brings us directly into what happens next. And now, as the pressure continues to build from every direction, the situation reaches a point where speculation, perception, and legal reality all collide in a way that feels almost impossible to control. Because what started as isolated claims has now turned into a full-scale narrative war, one where every move, every silence, and every reaction is being analyzed, dissected, and amplified in real time. At the center of it all, Jay-Z remains firm in his position. His legal response is not just a denial, it's a challenge. He's not asking for the conversation to stop. He's asking for it to be tested in the one place where truth is supposed to matter most, the courtroom. And that alone shifts the tone of the entire situation. Because when someone of that stature chooses to confront allegations head-on through legal channels, it signals that the response is being handled with intent, strategy, and long-term thinking. But the public doesn't operate like a courtroom. Public opinion moves faster, reacts harder, and often decides before all the facts are even available. And that's where the role of figures like 50 Cent becomes even more significant. Whether he intends to or not, his presence in this narrative acts like a catalyst. Every comment he makes, every hint he drops, and every moment he chooses to speak adds another layer to a story that is already overflowing with interpretation. And that's the key word here, interpretation, because at this stage, much of what's circulating is not verified fact. It's interpretation of statements, interpretation of silence, interpretation of timing. And when interpretation takes over, narratives become less about truth and more about belief. Meanwhile, the situation surrounding Sean Combs continues to influence how everything else is being perceived. The ongoing legal scrutiny, the serious nature of the allegations, and the attention from both media and the public have created an environment where every associated name is being re-examined. Not because they are confirmed to be involved in anything beyond their own matters, but because the human mind naturally looks for patterns when faced with uncertainty, and in this case, the pattern is being built in real time. But here's where things become even more complicated. The more the story grows, the more voices enter it. Some are credible, some are speculative, and some are simply looking to capitalize on the attention. But in a situation like this, all voices are treated equally by the algorithm-driven nature of online platforms. And that means even the most unverified claim can reach millions within hours. That's how narratives expand beyond control. And that's why the current environment feels so intense. Because now, every new statement isn't just a comment, it's a signal. Every reaction isn't just emotional, it's interpreted as part of a larger story. And every silence isn't just absence, viewed as something meaningful. This is exactly how situations like this evolve from legal matters into cultural moments. But while the public continues to debate, question, and speculate, the actual legal processes are moving forward at their own pace. Evidence is being examined, claims are being reviewed, and legal teams are preparing their strategies. This is where outcomes will eventually be determined not in online discussions, but through formal proceedings where standards of proof are required, and conclusions are based on evidence rather than perception. And that distinction matters because in the end, no matter how loud the conversation becomes, it's the evidence that will define the outcome. But until that point is reached, the narrative will continue to evolve, and as it does, more questions will emerge. Questions about timing, questions about motive, questions about why certain voices are louder than others, and questions about whether this is truly a series of unrelated events. or something more connected beneath the surface. But right now, there are no confirmed answers to those questions, only competing narratives. And that's what makes this situation so compelling and so unpredictable, because it exists at the intersection of law, media, and public perception. And in that space, truth doesn't always arrive quickly. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes evidence. And sometimes it takes silence before clarity can emerge. So where does this leave us? Right at the edge of something that is still unfolding, a situation where statements are still being made, claims are still being analyzed, and reactions are still shaping the story in real time. A situation where one new development could shift the entire conversation again, and until that moment arrives, all we can do is watch, listen, and wait, because this story is far from over. So here we are at the edge of a story that's still unfolding, still shifting, and still raising more questions than answers. Because whether you believe this is just industry noise, a carefully controlled narrative, or something far deeper hiding beneath the surface, one thing is clear: the conversation isn't slowing down anytime soon. The real question now is, what do you think is actually happening behind the scenes? Is this just a clash of personalities, legal pressure, and media exaggeration? Or are we looking at something much bigger that's slowly being exposed piece by piece? And more importantly, do you think Jay-Z will remain in control of the narrative? Or will voices like 50 Cent continue pushing this story into territories nobody expected?